Hey everybody. I'm more so kind of interested in the discussion when it comes to this like abolition versus identity politics kind of like talk. I guess I could have called like abolition politics or the politics of abolition and ended up in identity politics. But yeah, I feel like abolition, because abolition is like generally understood term to mean a set of political perspectives predicated on like a total and kind of like complete destruction of an oppressive system. We talk about abolishing slavery, um, abolishing the police, abolishing prisons, or whatever. The only and like that meaning, right? Like the complete kind of uh, like unfettered surrender, destruction, right? The only caveat that I would throw in on is that we're talking about a Marxist understanding of abolition, meaning like the self-abolition of those subjected to the oppressive system, abolition from below as opposed to abolition from above. And if folks want to talk more about that in the discussion, then I'd love to talk more about that specifically. Um, Initially, I'd like to point out, as Sarah Garnham does in the podcast, that we aren't criticizing identity politics in the same way that the right have adopted criticisms of identity politics to be these kind of like dog whistles to other conservatives for anything to oppose any and all oppressed groups progressing towards liberation. We fully recognize each oppressed group's particular and special oppression. We have no disagreements whatsoever that the experiences of people who hold oppressed identities are worse than those who do not. Whether or not a certain group is subjected to worse living and working conditions is not the question we are asking. We are asking the question of what do we do about it? While it might seem disingenuous to not list out oppressed identities' particular struggles, we hold those struggles as self-evident and wholly valid at the point of experience. More so, we're asking, what to do about them. Identity politics, on the other hand, as opposed to abolition politics, is a bit more kind of ill-defined and hard to nail down than abolition. Unfortunately, identity politics is a bit more difficult to talk about because the term that was given to a certain framework of understanding, of the world, rather than that framework kind of self-consciously understanding itself, or like adherence to that framework kind of developing their own name or terminology. People don't really walk around as outspoken identity politicians or write about identity politicalisms in the same way that we identify as Marxists, as communists, and write and think in such a way that kind of honors those frameworks or keeps those frameworks respected. As well as identity politics becoming so overwhelmingly pervasive in a number of discourses. Folks in all kinds of fields and contexts use the term identity politics to describe any number of concepts, either consciously or unconsciously. It gets tossed around a lot, as well as other discourses under neoliberalism. Lastly, identity politics is not merely a description of the politics of a particular group of people. Identity politics is a set of political strategies based on an analysis and set of assumptions. That the world is assumedly organized based on interactions, conflicting or harmonious, between identity groups, as opposed to class groups. That men or women, black or white, gay or straight, etc., and their interactions are the means that orient reality, as opposed to a Marxist view of class organizing reality. The exploiter and the exploited, the oppressor and the oppressed, the bourgeois and the proletariat, of those who produce the goods and services and those who control and reap the benefits of those goods. Lenin says there's only two ideologies, the ideology of the oppressor or of the bourgeois and the ideology of the proletariat, which is socialism. Secondly, identity politics is based primarily in personal experience and not necessarily group experience. One of the most damaging aspects of identity politics is perpetual atomization of the self. Identity politics based primarily in personal experience, namely painful ones, has an almost infinite ability to divide and alienate oneself from any group. I might be queer, but I'm not Black. I might be Black and queer, but I'm not neurodivergent. I might be Black, queer, and neurodivergent, but I grew up in a certain part of town that colors all of my experiences and my other identities intersecting identities as different. The focus being on you and the experiences that you've had as defining your identity, as opposed to any kind of collective group. The goals of identity politics flow from this analysis of the organization of reality, allowing people access and platforms to express these personal identities. Let me start that over. The goals of identity politics flow from this analysis of the organization of reality. That is one based on identities. Allowing people access and platforms to express these personal identities and experiences. Based out of the second definition, if we are all infinitely atomized, then no two stories are ever the same. So we must perpetually strive to make these marginal identities seen and heard. Not to say this is a bad thing. Allowing people the time and space to express their own personal experiences is generally like good. And then the second goal being about representation. If the analysis holds true that the world is organized based off of identity and not class, then we simply need to have greater representation in public, private, and any other institution across society. We need more women CEOs, we need more Black cops, we need more gay bar owners. If only we had more trans movie stars, etc. The implication being that altering the identity of those leading institutions will inherently change the nature of those institutions. Look no further than the most progressive cabinet ever appointed under Joe Biden, for an example. Despite being so multicultural and inclusive, we see the exact same war machine. We see state terrorism just as before, mass deportations, sacrificing human lives to the economy, just the same as any other administration, no matter how be it how singularly white or singularly male dominated those administrations were. That's like about all I have on this, honestly. I have a couple more thoughts, but they're not as well organized, so I'm just going to kind of like make a few points. Identity politics is hyper-focused on individual experience as the side of political conflict comes to the strategy of privilege and allyship. If it's true that my own personal self and identity is what is most needed for political purposes, then I should spend a lot of time thinking about myself and my own identity as a means of contribution. That I should take a deep dive into my own psyche to think up some time that I've had a racist thought or a sexist inclination. This makes for a very narcissistic perspective and helps no one but yourself. We should be asking questions like, how do we end oppression? How do we liberate the oppressed? How do we abolish exploitation? What are the mechanisms necessary to abolish the police? Identity politics is so focused on identities would have us reject the imperative tool of solidarity. The ever-increasing invention of identities does not but atomize and split the working class into more and more minute groups, when in fact we share an infinite amount of commonality than our identities. The liberation for all oppressed groups is inextricably intertwined with other workers and not merely those with your identity. The saying goes that a Black worker shares infinitely more in common with their white coworker than Obama or Beyonce or LeBron or Al Sharpton or any other member of the Black elite. Only a multifaceted, multi-gendered, yes, we mean all the genders, multicultural, mass movement oriented towards the capitalist producer of oppression will ever be able to abolish exploitation for good. That's all I got.